This is the life you couldn't give her. My ex-wife sent me that sentence in a text message on a Wednesday evening in late autumn, about 6 months ago, just before 9 o'clock. I was sitting at the kitchen table of my one-bedroom rental on 30th Street in Astoria, Queens, eating microwave macaroni and cheese for dinner. The message came with a photograph. The photograph was of my 8-year-old daughter, Juniper. She was sitting in the back seat of a Maybach S680, parked in the driveway of a 6-bedroom Hamptons estate on the eastern end of Lily Pond Lane in East Hampton. She was wearing a navy blue cashmere sweater I didn't buy her. She was holding a leather equestrian helmet I didn't buy her. She was smiling, that careful, guarded smile she'd developed over the past 14 months, the one she only used when her mother was watching and her father was not. My ex-wife married my boss about 4 months ago. Let me tell you what I did with that photograph. Nothing, that's what I did. I didn't respond to the text. Not that Wednesday night, not the next morning, not in the 6 months since. I sat at my kitchen table for over 3 hours staring at the photograph on the cracked screen of my 4-year-old iPhone. I ate my macaroni, I washed the bowl, I put it away, I sat back down, I looked again. I couldn't bring myself to delete it, because that photograph was one of only 7 pictures of my daughter, from the past 14 months in which she was actually smiling. I saved it to a private album in my phone called Juniper. In 6 months, I opened that album maybe 3 times. That was all I could manage. My boss is named Augustin Caldwell. He's 67 years old. He's the founder, chairman, and sole owner of Sterling Vance Interiors, the high-end residential furniture and design company, where I've worked as a senior delivery and installation specialist on the Manhattan route for the past 9 years. His net worth is around $2.1 billion. He owns the Hamptons estate. He owns the 2-story penthouse at 1040 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, directly across the street from the Central Park Reservoir, valued at about $22 million. According to the real estate report Aurelia emailed me 4 weeks before the courthouse wedding she never invited me to. He owns the Maybach in the photograph. He owns a 68-foot Hatteras yacht in Montauk, a ski chalet on Red Mountain in Aspen, 2 original Rothko paintings, and the company that pays me $62,000 a year to deliver his other customers' furniture to Upper East Side townhouses. He's Aurelia's 4th husband. She was my wife for 9 years. Let me tell you about those 9 years. We met at a wedding in Queens. A friend of mine from the construction crew I worked on briefly in my early 20s was marrying her college roommate. Aurelia was 24. I was 27. She wore a green silk dress that didn't fit anyone else in the room. I was in a rented gray suit. We danced once. We exchanged numbers in the parking lot. 7 months later, we were engaged. I knew, even then, that her family on Long Island looked at me the way wealthy Long Island families look at delivery men from Queens whose fathers raised them in a 3-bedroom house in Garden City and whose they understood from the obituary my father provided them, had died when the man at their daughter's engagement dinner was 7 years old. But Aurelia liked me anyway. She told me she liked me because I was uncomplicated. That's the word she used. I took it as a compliment then. I understand now, in retrospect, what it actually meant. It meant she could see in the first year of our marriage that I would not be the kind of man whose income trajectory would eventually justify the silk dress and the engagement ring her father had paid for. She filed for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences about 14 months ago. The Queens County Family Court magistrate granted her primary physical custody of our daughter Juniper, with visitation rights for me, every other weekend, 1 weeknight dinner. That was 11 months ago. 4 months ago, she married Augustin Caldwell at the Manhattan Marriage Bureau on Worth Street. The following Monday, she and Juniper moved into the penthouse at 1040 Fifth Avenue. For the past 4 months, I've been picking my daughter up from the private school on East 89th Street that Augustin Caldwell pays for every other Friday afternoon when school lets out, and returning her to the marble lobby of 1040 Fifth Avenue every Sunday evening. The uniformed doorman, under Aurelia's standing instructions, takes Juniper's overnight bag from me and walks her to the private elevator. He doesn't make eye contact with me. I haven't been allowed past the lobby in 4 months. I haven't told my daughter what I think of her mother, not once in 14 months. I haven't told a single coworker at Sterling Vance Interiors that the woman who became our boss's wife 4 months ago was once my wife. Let me tell you the rest of the story. But first, let me tell you who I am. My name is Declan Halloran. I'm 38 years old. I'm one of 2 senior delivery and installation specialists at Sterling Vance Interiors. Over 9 years, I've personally delivered and installed about 3,400 pieces of high-end residential furniture into roughly 1,700 Manhattan addresses, including, by my own quiet count, the sectional sofa, the dining table, 4 pieces of nursery furniture, 2 bedside tables, and the leather reading chair that now sits in the library of Augustin Caldwell's penthouse at 1040 Fifth Avenue, where my daughter does her homework 3 afternoons a week. I installed that leather reading chair 5 years ago. At the time, I didn't know the man it was being delivered for. I'll come back to that. Now let me tell you about the Tuesday morning of the delivery I'm about to describe. The morning started normal. I woke up early, like I do every weekday. The alarm on my 4-year-old iPhone, the same alarm I'd been waking up to for 9 years at Sterling Vance Interiors. I made coffee in the same drip coffee maker my father gave me as a housewarming gift the year I moved out of his place in Garden City. I drank it standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the photograph I'd taped to the refrigerator, Juniper, at 6 years old, holding a Mother's Day card she'd made me in kindergarten before she understood that Mother's Day cards were supposed to go to mothers and not to fathers, and back when she still made me cards anyway. I ate 2 pieces of toast with peanut butter. I left the apartment a little before 7. I took the N train into Manhattan. I clocked in at the Sterling Vance Interiors warehouse on West 26th Street a little before 8. Tobias and I spent the next 45 minutes loading the truck for the day's 6 deliveries. We had 3 Upper East Side stops, 2 on the Upper West Side, and 1 in Tribeca. The Chaise Lounge to 14 East 78th Street was the 3rd stop on the manifest. I didn't look at the customer name on the manifest that morning. I never look at the customer names. I look at the addresses. I look at the floor numbers. I look at the elevator dimensions and the doorway clearances. I do the work. The delivery was scheduled for late morning on a Tuesday in mid-May, about 6 months after that Wednesday evening in late autumn when Aurelia sent me the photograph. The item was an antique chaise lounge that our restoration department had spent 14 weeks reupholstering in pale blue velvet. The address was 14 East 78th Street in Manhattan, between 5th Avenue and Madison, on a historic block of the Upper East Side that everyone in senior delivery at Sterling Vance Interiors calls the Forgotten Block. Forgotten Block is a row of about 14 limestone mansions built in the late 1890s by a single architectural firm, Carrere and Hastings. Over the decades, they've been homes to various branches of various New York industrial families, names I'd grown up in Astoria not knowing. According to the delivery manifest note, the mansion at 14 East 78th Street hadn't ordered new furniture in 41 years. The current order, the Chaise Lounge, was placed about 15 weeks ago by telephone by an elderly woman named Honora Beauchamp. The same manifest noted that Miss Beauchamp was the only resident of the mansion for the past 23 years. It also noted that she was 83 years old. I pulled the 26-foot Sterling Vance delivery truck up to the curb in front of 14 East 78th Street a few minutes before the scheduled delivery time. My delivery partner, a 31-year-old from Bay Ridge named Tobias Cardiff, who'd been my partner for 4 years, unlocked the rear roll-up door. We carried the chaise lounge, wrapped in 3 layers of moving blankets, up the 7 limestone steps of the front stoop. I pressed the brass doorbell at 11:14 a.m. The door opened 11 seconds later. The woman who opened it wasn't 83. She was closer to 77, by my estimate. She wore a pale gray cashmere cardigan over a navy blue cotton dress. In her left hand, she held a white porcelain teacup with, I figured out later, Earl Grey tea she'd been drinking on the antique velvet sofa in the front parlor before the doorbell rang. Her hair was white. Her eyes were gray and clear, the kind of clarity you see in older women who haven't cried much in the past 50 years. She looked at me. 3 seconds, maybe. Then she dropped the teacup. It hit the marble landing of the entryway and broke into about 7 pieces. Earl Grey tea splashed onto the pale blue Persian runner in the front hallway, onto the wooden molding at the base of the entryway wall, and onto the tip of my right work boot. She didn't look down at the broken cup. She looked at me. And she said, in the quiet voice of a woman who'd been preparing to say 4 particular words to one particular person for 31 years but hadn't known, until she opened the door, that she was actually going to be the one to say them. Your mother didn't die. In 38 years, I'd never cried in front of a stranger. I didn't cry at my father's funeral 5 years ago. I didn't cry the morning Aurelia served me divorce papers at the kitchen table of our Forest Hills apartment. I didn't cry the Wednesday evening in late autumn when she sent me that photograph of my daughter in the back seat of Augustin Caldwell's Maybach with the caption, "This is the life you couldn't give her." I cried on the marble landing of 14 East 78th Street that Tuesday morning. I cried for about 90 seconds. The elderly woman stood 2 feet in front of me, broken teacup at her feet, spilled tea on the Persian runner behind her. And she watched me cry without saying another word, the way a woman who's spent 31 years preparing to deliver 4 words watches a stranger receive them. She understood, after all those years, that the receiving needed time. No additional words were possible. When I finally stopped, I wiped my face with the back of my left hand. I said, in the only voice my throat could manage, "Ma'am, let me tell you the rest. But first, let me tell you what I'd been told." When I was 7 years old, on a Saturday morning in the middle of summer, my father told me my mother had died of an illness. He described the illness as a condition of the mind that became a condition of the body. At 7, I didn't know what that meant. He told me my mother had spent 14 months in a small hospital upstate. A hospital my younger sister and I weren't allowed to visit because the doctors said visits would agitate her condition. He told me she died there on a Friday evening in the middle of summer, peacefully, while a nurse read her Emily Dickinson poems. He told me her body's cremated according to her own previous wishes, and the urn with her ashes was buried in a private ceremony, one my sister and I weren't allowed to attend, in the Beauchamp family plot at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Westchester County. In 31 years, I never visited that plot. In 31 years, no one ever told me that the urn in the Beauchamp family plot at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery didn't contain any human remains. My mother's name was Cora Beauchamp Halloran. She was 32 when she gave birth to me. From the few photographs my father kept on the mantelpiece in our house in Garden City, Long Island, I'd pieced together that she was a bright woman with my dark hair, my dark eyes, and a careful smile that always looked, in every picture, like it was about to widen into a laugh. According to the 4 words this elderly stranger just spoke to me, she was alive. She'd been alive for 31 years. She'd been alive for my entire adult life. She was alive the afternoon I graduated from Bayside High School in Queens. She was alive the afternoon I married Aurelia Whitcomb at the Catholic Church on Steinway Street in Astoria. She was alive the morning my daughter Juniper was born at New York Presbyterian. She was alive that Wednesday evening in late autumn when my ex-wife texted me the photograph of my daughter in my boss's Maybach. She was alive that Tuesday morning in mid-May when I stood on the front stoop of 14 East 78th Street with Tobias Cardiff in a chaise lounge, wrapped in 3 moving blankets. The elderly woman in front of me wasn't looking at my face anymore. She was looking at the broken teacup on the marble landing. After about 11 seconds, she spoke. I've been waiting to say that for 31 years. I wasn't certain until the moment you walked up the steps that I'd ever say it. I wasn't certain until you turned your face toward the door that the man delivering the chaise lounge would be Cora's son. I apologize for the teacup. Please, come in, I said, in a voice that hadn't drawn a full breath in 9 seconds. Ma'am, she said. Honora, my name is Honora, I'm your aunt, she said. Your delivery partner can stay in the truck. The chaise lounge can wait. There are things I've been waiting to tell you. There's no rush, but no reason to delay either. She turned around. She walked. With the slow, careful step of a 77-year-old woman whose left hip was replaced about 14 months ago, into the front parlor of the mansion at 14 East 78th Street. I turned to Tobias. I said, "Toby, I'm going to need about an hour." Toby said, "Take what you need. Dick, I'll be in the truck." I walked into the front parlor. I closed the front door behind me. Let me tell you what Honora Beauchamp told me over the next hour and 43 minutes. My mother didn't die in a hospital upstate on a Friday evening in the middle of summer 31 years ago. What actually happened? About a week after the date Father gave my sister and me as the date of her death, my mother was transferred from the short-term psychiatric unit at New York Hospital Westchester in White Plains, where she'd been admitted for a severe postpartum onset major depressive episode that began about 4 months after my younger sister's birth and escalated, over the next 3 years, into a chronic and treatment-resistant condition requiring full-time residential supervision, to the long-term residential mental health facility at Briarcliff Manor in northern Westchester County. She'd been there ever since, in an upstairs room overlooking the fish pond on the eastern edge of the property. For 31 years. She was 39 the morning of the transfer. According to the psychiatric team that managed her care for 3 decades, she could receive visitors. She could hold simple conversations. She could recognize the faces of the people she'd loved most in her life. And she remembered, in particular, the details of my first 7 years. Those memories, Honora said, were the bright fixed center of the interior life she'd been quietly maintaining all that time. My father never visited her. He visited her exactly once. That was the Sunday morning of her transfer to Briarcliff Manor. He signed the paperwork. He paid the first 6 months of the monthly maintenance fee from his own checking account. He stood in the administrative office on the first floor of the main building for 14 minutes, according to what Honora later heard from the intake director. Before he left, he said one thing to the intake director: "My wife will be paid for in full in perpetuity by automatic monthly draft on this account. My children will not be informed of her location. My children will not be informed of her continued existence. If she should die at any point during her residency, you will contact me, only me, at the telephone number on this form. You will not contact anyone else under any circumstances. If she improves, you will likewise contact only me. She will not, under any circumstances, be released from this facility. She will not, under any circumstances, be granted visitation by anyone other than the individual whose name I've written on the second line of this form. Do you understand?" The intake director said. "Yes, sir." The name my father wrote on the second line was Honora Beauchamp. He never spoke to Honora again. 3 weeks after the transfer, his attorney sent her a letter. The letter stated that any attempt on her part to contact my sister or me, or to disclose the truth about my mother's location to anyone in the Halloran family, would result in my father terminating the monthly maintenance payments to Briarcliff Manor. My mother would then be removed from the facility into the public mental health system, where her care quality would, in the attorney's careful phrasing, deteriorate considerably. Honora received the letter. Honora complied. For 31 years, she never contacted my sister or me. For 31 years, she visited my mother on the first Sunday of every month. She brought the same things every time: a bouquet of pink peonies from a flower shop on Madison Avenue at the corner of East 75th Street, a wax paper bag with 2 lemon poppy seed scones from a bakery on Lexington, and a bound photo album, updated yearly, with the public photographs of my sister and me that she could find from yearbooks, local newspapers, the wedding announcement page of the New York Times the week I married Aurelia, and the birth announcement my sister placed in the Charleston Post and Courier the morning her twin sons were born. Every Sunday my mother opened the photo album. She touched the pictures of my face with her index finger. She said my name out loud. Every Sunday she asked Honora the same question: "When will I see him?" Every Sunday Honora gave the same answer: "When he's ready. When he finds his way." I sat on the antique velvet sofa in the front parlor of the mansion at 14 East 78th Street. It was early afternoon by then. Honora and I had been talking for over an hour. She said, "Yes," I said. "Did my father die 5 years ago?" She said, "Yes, he did. Of an acute coronary event in the kitchen of his condominium in Boca Raton, Florida. On a Sunday morning in early spring, I said. Did you wait for the past 5 years for me to come find you? She said. I did. I said. Why didn't you come find me? She said. Because I gave your father my word. The word was given under duress. The word was given for the only reason that could have justified giving it, your mother's safety. By any rational reading, the word expired the morning your father died. I spent the past 5 years preparing to break it. I wasn't certain my own remaining strength would carry me long enough to break it. About 15 weeks ago, when I placed the chaise lounge order, I was preparing to break it. I was waiting quietly for the right delivery driver. I said, How did you know it would be me? She said, I didn't. I called Sterling Vance Interiors 15 weeks ago. I asked the customer service representative on the phone whether they had a senior delivery specialist named Declan Halloran on their Manhattan route. She said they did. I asked whether you typically handled Upper East Side deliveries. She said you did. I ordered the chaise lounge. In a handwritten note I sent with the deposit, I asked them to please make sure Declan Halloran was the specialist assigned. I didn't give a reason. She didn't ask. I said, Honora. She said, Declan. I said, Can I see her? She said, Yes, you can see her on Sunday morning. I'll drive you to Briarcliff Manor. I informed the intake director 3 weeks ago that you'd be coming. He informed your mother's primary psychiatrist. Over the past 3 weeks, the psychiatrist has been preparing her, in slow, careful conversations, for the possibility that you'd be visiting. She paused. She said, She's been waiting for that conversation for 31 years. Let me tell you about that Sunday morning at Briarcliff Manor. I drove from Honora's mansion at 14 East 78th Street to the front gates of Briarcliff Manor Residential Mental Health Facility on a county road outside Briarcliff Manor Village in northern Westchester County. On the Sunday morning after the Tuesday afternoon of the delivery, Honora rode in the passenger seat of my 2014 Honda Civic. The drive took about an hour and 11 minutes. She spoke the whole way, carefully, unhurried. In the voice of a woman who'd been waiting 31 years to give a single passenger a single ride. Pacing the conversation, by her own quiet design, to hand him every piece of information he'd need to survive the next 2 hours of his life. I wasn't sure I'd survive them, but I did. Honora walked beside me through the front lobby of Briarcliff Manor, past the kind receptionist who'd been told we were coming, up the carpeted staircase to the second floor, down the hallway to the third door on the left, and into a sunlit private room overlooking the fish pond on the eastern edge of the property. A woman was sitting in a wooden rocking chair by the window. She wore a pale blue cotton dress. In her hands, she held the bound photo album Honora had been bringing her every first Sunday for 31 years. The album was open on her lap to a page Honora had updated about 8 weeks ago. A page with one printed photograph of me from the Sterling Vance Interiors website, standing beside the antique cherrywood writing desk we'd installed in the lobby of the Carlisle Hotel about 14 months ago. She looked up when Honora and I walked in. She looked at Honora for about 3 seconds. She looked at me for the first time in 31 years, for about 11 seconds without speaking. Then she said, in the quiet voice of a woman who'd been preparing to say one particular sentence to one particular person for 3 decades, and who'd decided, in the careful interior accounting she'd been keeping of the fixed center of her life, to say that one sentence first. Declan, your hair is the same color it was when you were 7. I said, Mom. She said, Yes, sweetheart. I said, Mom. She said, I'm here. I've been here. I'm still your mother. I'm sorry. I crossed the sunlit room. I knelt in front of the rocking chair. I took her careful hands in both of mine. For about 14 minutes, I couldn't speak. She didn't ask me to. She held my hands. She looked at my face. At about the 12-minute mark, she said,
Your eyes look tired, sweetheart.
At about the 14-minute mark, I managed the first sentence I'd been able to assemble in the careful interior space I'd been operating in since the moment Honora spoke the 4 words on the marble landing 4 days earlier.
Mom.
I have a daughter. Her name is Juniper. She's 8 years old. She has your eyes. She doesn't know about you yet. I'd like to bring her to meet you when you're ready. My mother said, Declan. I said, Yes, Mom. She said, Honora has been showing me her photographs for the past 7 years. For 7 years, I've been holding her name in my mouth like a piece of hard candy. I haven't been able to say it out loud, because I wasn't certain, until you walked into this room 10 minutes ago, that I'd ever be allowed to. I'd like to say it now, I said. Yes, Mom, she said, in the quiet voice of a woman who'd been waiting 7 years to say one particular name out loud to one particular person. Juniper, I said. Yes, Mom, that's her name, she said. When can I meet her? I said. I'm ready now, I said. I'll bring her next Sunday. I drove back to Astoria that Sunday afternoon. Honora rode with me as far as her mansion. We talked on the way back about what I would tell Juniper. Honora suggested we keep it simple for the first conversation. She said, children that age don't need the full history. They need to know there's a person, and the person loves them, and they're going to meet. I picked Juniper up the following Friday afternoon for our weekend together. I waited until Saturday morning at the kitchen table of my apartment while she was eating a bowl of Cheerios and I was drinking coffee. I told her I had something important to tell her. She put down her spoon. She has my mother's habit of giving you her full attention when she understands you're about to say something serious. I told her I'd recently learned something about my own mother. I told her my mother, her grandmother, hadn't actually died like I always thought. I told her my mother had been very sick for a long time, and the doctors had moved her to a hospital where she could be safely cared for. And my father had told me she had died because he didn't think I could understand the truth at 7 years old. I told her my mother was alive, her grandmother was alive. Her grandmother lived in a quiet place near the Hudson River, with people who took care of her. Her grandmother knew about Juniper. She had been wanting to meet Juniper for a long time. Juniper listened to all of this without saying a word. When I finished, she asked, "Does she know my name?" I said, "Yes." "She knows your name," she asked. "Does she know I'm 8? I said. "Yes." She asked, "Can we go see her?" I said, "We can go this Sunday if you want." She said, "Okay." She picked up her spoon and finished her Cheerios. I drove her to Riverdale the following Sunday morning. By then, I'd already arranged my mother's transfer from Briarcliff Manor to the new facility, with Honora's help. Juniper wore a yellow cotton dress with white flowers on it. She brought a drawing she'd made the night before, a picture of 3 figures holding hands, a stick figure of her, a stick figure of me, and a stick figure she'd labeled Grandma. My mother was sitting in her new room when we walked in. She looked at Juniper for about 7 seconds. She said, "You have your father's hands," Juniper said. "I drew you a picture." She gave my mother the drawing. My mother held it in her hands the way Honora held the photo album every Sunday for 31 years. Here's what happened over the next 5 months. On Honora's recommendation, I retained an estate attorney in Manhattan named Westcott Holloway of Holloway and Pruitt on East 42nd Street with Honora's full cooperation. Mr. Holloway reviewed the legal instruments my father executed 31 years ago. The original transfer paperwork to Briarcliff Manor, the letter to Honora from my father's attorney 3 weeks after the transfer, and the disinheritance clause my father inserted into his own will about 14 years before his death. The clause reduced my sister's and my share of his estate to $1 each if we ever discovered or sought to discover any information about our mother's continued existence. Miss Holloway advised me that the clause was no longer enforceable for 2 independent reasons. First, my father was already dead. Second, the clause's purpose, ensuring my mother's silence, was fundamentally invalidated by the fact that Honora, not I, had initiated the disclosure. He also told me one other thing. My mother also had a mother, my maternal grandmother. Her name was Maricela Beauchamp. She died 17 years ago. She left my mother an inheritance of about $7,800,000 in the form of a trust administered for the past 17 years by Honora as my mother's legal guardian. With careful investment, the trust had grown to about $11,400,000. Under its terms, the principal would pass, on my mother's death, to her surviving children in equal shares. On the Friday afternoon I met with Mr. Holloway, Honora executed another legal instrument. It named me as the residual beneficiary of her own estate. The mansion at 14 East 78th Street, a portfolio of municipal bonds her father left her in 1958, and a collection of late 19th century American oil paintings she'd inherited from her own mother. Total, about $45 million in net assets. I'm not going to tell you what I did with the money. I'll tell you what I didn't do. I didn't quit my job at Sterling Vance Interiors. I didn't move out of my one-bedroom rental on 30th Street in Astoria. What I did do, over the past 5 months, was transfer my mother from Briarcliff Manor to a private residential mental health facility in Riverdale, in the Northwest Bronx, about 14 minutes by car from my apartment in Astoria. The facility has a private garden, a patio overlooking the Hudson River, and 3 resident psychiatric nurses who, in the 5 months I've been watching them, treat my mother with the careful, attentive kindness she wasn't receiving. In Honora's quiet retrospective opinion, during her 31 years of previous care. I visit my mother every Wednesday evening after work. I visit her every Saturday morning. Honora visits her every Sunday afternoon, the way she's done for 31 years. Juniper has visited her 4 times. She started calling her Grandma Cora. She started asking me, on the weekend afternoons we spend together, whether she can move into my apartment instead of going back to her mother's penthouse at 1040 Fifth Avenue. I haven't told her yes. I haven't told her no. I've told her this isn't a decision she needs to make this year, and that I'll be here on 30th Street in Astoria and Wednesday evenings in Riverdale and every other Friday afternoon at the private school on East 89th Street for as long as she needs me to be here, regardless of what she decides. According to a senior associate in corporate communications at Sterling Vance Interiors, Augustin Caldwell has been spending more and more time over the past 2 months in his attorney's offices on Park Avenue. They've been reviewing the prenuptial agreement Aurelia signed at the Manhattan Marriage Bureau 4 months ago. I don't know what Augustin Caldwell will do, I don't need to, but let me tell you what Aurelia did. About 6 weeks after my first Sunday at Briarcliff Manor, Aurelia called me. She'd never called me, not once in the 14 months since the divorce. I was at the warehouse on West 26th Street, eating lunch out of a paper bag at my locker. When I saw her name on the screen, I almost didn't answer, but I did. She said, "Declan, is it true your mother is alive?" I said. "Yes," she said, "Juniper told me." I said, "I know." She said, "Were you planning to tell me?" I said, "No, Aurelia, I wasn't." She was quiet for about 11 seconds. Then she said, "Declan, I want to apologize for what I sent you back in the autumn. The photograph. The caption." I said, "Okay." She said, "I shouldn't have sent it." I said, "No, you shouldn't have." She said, "Are you angry with me?" I said, "I'm not angry. I'm tired. I'm going to hang up now, Aurelia. We'll see each other Friday afternoon at the school." "The way we always do," she said. "Declan," I said. "Goodbye, Aurelia." I hung up the phone. I went back to my sandwich. She hasn't called me again since. She hasn't sent me another text. She hasn't said another word to me beyond the small, careful exchanges that happen every other Friday in the lobby of 1040 Fifth Avenue and every other Sunday at the door of the private school on East 89th Street. We're cordial. We're parents. We're nothing else now. I think she figured out in that 11-second silence on the phone that the photograph she sent me back in the autumn was the last photograph she was ever going to send me. The text caption she'd been planning to send the next time Juniper went somewhere expensive was the text caption she wasn't going to send. The small, ongoing project of demonstrating to me and to herself that she'd traded up from the marriage she'd settled for at 25 was a project she couldn't continue, because the project required me to be diminished, and I wasn't diminished anymore. My mother was alive. That was the small fact that ended the project. Let me tell you about my sister. My younger sister's name is Saskia. She's 35 years old. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina, with her husband and her twin sons. She was 4 when my father told us our mother died. She doesn't remember her at all. She has, over the past 3 decades, occasionally mentioned to me at Thanksgiving dinners, at family weddings on the phone, that she sometimes wonders what our mother was like. She had a single faded photograph she kept on her dresser growing up. After she moved out, she kept it in a drawer. I called her on the phone from Honora's mansion the Wednesday evening after I met our mother for the first time. I told her the whole story. I told her about Honora. I told her about the postpartum onset depression. I told her about Briarcliff Manor. I told her our father had lied to us for 31 years and had paid an attorney to make sure the lie held. She listened in silence for about 20 minutes. When I finished, she said, "Declan, I need a few days," I said. "Take whatever time you need." She called me back 4 days later. She said she'd booked a flight to LaGuardia for the following Friday. She said she wanted to meet our mother. She said she wanted to meet Honora. She said she wanted to bring her twin sons. She came up that following weekend. She walked into Honora's mansion at 14 East 78th Street and stopped in the entryway and looked at the broken and mended teacup on the mantelpiece. She didn't ask what it was. Honora gave her a glass of water. She drank it. She let Honora hug her. She drove with me to Riverdale on Sunday morning. Our mother looked at her for a long time before saying anything. She said, "Saskia, you look like my mother." Saskia said, "I didn't know." Our mother said, "I know, sweetheart. I know you didn't." Saskia has flown up from Charleston 3 times in the past 5 months. Her twin sons, they're 6 years old, have started drawing pictures for their grandmother. My mother keeps them on the wall of her room next to the framed picture of 3 stick figures Juniper drew that first Sunday. I'm sitting in the front parlor of the mansion at 14 East 78th Street on a Sunday evening in late October. Honora is in the kitchen at the back of the house, brewing Earl Grey tea on the antique stove her mother installed in 1953. Juniper is in the library off the main hallway, sitting in a leather reading chair identical to the one I personally delivered and installed in Augustin Caldwell's penthouse about 5 years ago. A chair Honora ordered from Sterling Vance Interiors 3 weeks ago, at my request, when I told her Juniper liked the one she used at her mother's apartment. Juniper is reading a chapter book about a girl who lives in a house on the prairie with her father, her mother, her sister, and a brown dog. The teacup is on the wooden mantelpiece above the fireplace in the front parlor. It's no longer in 7 pieces. That Tuesday afternoon in mid-May, I scooped the 7 pieces of the teacup into a plastic sandwich bag from the marble landing of Honora's entryway. I carried them back to Astoria in the canvas tool bag I keep in the cab of the Sterling Vance Interiors delivery truck. The following Saturday afternoon, by the light of my kitchen window, over my kitchen table, I glued the 7 pieces back together with porcelain repair adhesive I bought at a hardware store on Steinway Street. I returned the teacup to Honora, in its repaired form, on the Sunday afternoon after the Sunday morning of my first visit to my mother. Honora kept it on the wooden mantelpiece in the front parlor for the past 5 months. The visible gold-colored seams between the 7 pieces, the thin lines where the porcelain adhesive set into the fault lines of the broken cup, are the first thing I look at every Sunday evening when Juniper and I walk into the front parlor for tea with Honora and my mother. They're the first thing my mother looks at. By my own quiet observation, when she walks into the front parlor after Honora helps her up the 7 limestone steps of the front stoop. In 5 months, she's never asked me how the teacup broke. She's never asked me how it was repaired. But on 3 separate Sunday evenings, she's taken it down from the mantelpiece, held it carefully in both hands, and turned it slowly under the lamp on the side table beside the antique velvet sofa, looking at the thin gold-colored seams, the way a woman who spent 31 years in a private upstairs room overlooking a fish pond looks at any object that's been broken and put back together by someone who loves her. Each of those 3 Sunday evenings, she's returned the teacup to the mantelpiece. Each of those 3 Sunday evenings, she's said the same thing to me. "This is the prettiest teacup I've ever seen, Declan." Each of those 3 Sunday evenings, I've said the same thing back. "Thank you, Mom." Honora is calling for me from the kitchen. "The Earl Grey tea is ready. I'm going to go pour it. I want to ask you one short question before you scroll. Who in your family was lost? Not to death, but to silence. And is it too late even now to find them again? Comment your answer below. 1 sentence is enough. I read every single one. Some men reading this tonight have buried their mothers. Some men reading this tonight have buried their fathers. A few men reading this tonight have buried, at the quiet instruction of the people or the institutions that raised them, people who never actually died. You don't know whether you're one of those men. Most men don't. Most men spend their entire adult lives operating on the assumption, based on what their families told them when they were 7 years old, that the urn in the family cemetery plot contains the actual ashes of the bright woman whose face appeared in the photographs on the mantelpiece in the house where they grew up. In some men's lives, the urn contains the ashes of their mothers. In other men's lives, the urn contains nothing. You don't know which kind of urn was buried in your family's cemetery plot. Most men, when they find out on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when an elderly woman opens the door of a forgotten mansion on East 78th Street, drops her teacup, and says 4 words that change everything they were told about who they were for the past 31 years. Tell me in the comments tonight who in your family has been quietly missing. Tell me whether you've ever asked. Tell me whether you're ready now to ask. I will read every single answer.